everybody. If you know it or not, or if you've ever had an experience toward that or not, that doesn't matter. I'm claiming that there are more loves for each person than a singular. There may very well be a singular only, but there's usually the capacity for any one of us to be as much in love as we've ever been with an additional or another individual in a single lifetime.
So the maturity in that situation is to not automatically throw out the old soulmate for the new soulmate, but to look for the value in what you already have rather than to just...
Yeah, this whole thing can be very, very trying and very, very difficult. And as I've said, most near-death experiencers, intensive near-death experiencers, who have a profound spiritual awakening, become separated and divorced. So, I mean, the statistics speak for itself as far as this is not just a caution that I'm trying to share with you.
It's a reality.
This is a very trying and traumatic, usually, and dramatic reality.
And what happens is that all the children that get involved in all of these switchings around or whatever. We have a family in our hometown where the ex-husband and wife bought a duplex, remarried, and they've got new children and shared children. I mean, if you can do that, that's beautiful because they haven't lost the parents. But in most cases, there's so much pain involved.
One quick statement, which I just want to quick yell this out, is that in any separation of any form, of any kind, I don't care if it's that you're in separate bedrooms within the household, two spouses, or if you have separated voluntarily or separated legally or divorced, any form of separation or, well, I still love your father and I'm living with him, but I want you to know that I'm in love with somebody else. Now, we are going to stay together for you children. And scenarios such as that, the example you gave, where there are two families living side by side and they have switch wives or whatever scenario it is, there is a tremendous amount of responsibility that I very rarely see recognized by people who do that. In other words, have accomplished that or do that. And that one of the examples or one of the things that I want to point out is if there are children involved, they are traumatized by the scenario. They're traumatized by the scenario as it developed. They're traumatized and affected forever after in their life. Regardless of how lovey-dovey you think it turns out or how positive or nice, they are traumatized and they are affected for life. I have heard so often people say, they're young, they'll adjust. And I want to say, bullshit. They're young and they will adjust, but they will not adjust to what you're thinking they will adjust. And they will not be normal. They will not be usual. They will be different. They will be new and not necessarily as well off. Now, I'm not saying that nobody should ever separate. I'm not saying that. There are circumstances where it is a necessity. There are circumstances where it just can't work any other way. And we've tried for 15 years to patch this up, all the sentences and so on. And in spite of the realization that you children are going to be hurt and traumatized and it's going to last your entire life, that we separate, we have ourselves to think of as well as you, and the balance of all this knowledge says that it's going to be best that we separate.
You can love them
separately
than together.
Right, I'm not saying that it cannot be justified.
Right.
Situations like that can be justified, but don't deceive yourself or be deceived by people that there is not that horrendously traumatic effect on not just children, but casual acquaintances and friends, the families, and the plural families involved, and of course, especially children, regardless of how old the children are. I don't care if they're still in diapers or if they're 21 years old and have been through 2 divorces themselves. If their elderly parents divorce, it affects those children, regardless of their age or situation. A lot of people deceive themselves, and they go through situations like that not knowing that there will be that Minor examples is that the young daughter will hate the mother for leaving daddy. The young daughter will hate mommy for doing this and leaving her or bringing her with them. And vice versa. The gender doesn't matter. There is a tendency, which I know psychologically speaking, that the daughter will hate mommy because of what she did to daddy, even if legally, I'm emphasizing this, legally, daddy did the bad thing to create the scenario. If daddy is a physical abuser, if daddy has had extramarital affairs, which is intolerable to the female spouse, and the female spouse files for divorce because of illegitimate, all that sort of stuff, the young daughter will probably still blame mommy for the separation. Mommy instituted a bad thing.
You know what comes to mind, though, for me is that back when we were children and our parents really tried to prevent their marriages perfect, and they never let you see them argue, and then you go into your marriage thinking it's not correct to argue, and you think your marriage is falling apart because it wasn't like your mom's and dad's. You know, there's got to be sort of a balance there between letting your children think that relationships don't have to be worked on to continue, and yet letting them see so much of the pain that they'll never even want to get married.
Generally, we also have to consider in this statement generations, because our generation, meaning anywhere from 30 to 45-year-olds, right? Meaning the end of World War II. We were born the end of World War II.
Yeah.
From the baby boomers onwardly, there is no longer the necessity for two people to stay married. In other words, financially, therefore economically, physically, and socially. In other words, a person who was divorced in 1945 was shunned socially. Oh, that's the divorced person. Don't talk to her or him. Right? I mean, socially, in other words, in large circles, that person will be shunned. The necessity for physically speaking, in other words, I am married to you, you will take care of me, I will take care of you. There's no longer that need. If I need surgery, I don't need my wife Elaine to take care of me. There is the ambulance service, there is the social workers, there is the hospital, there is daycare, there is assistance, there is all kinds of things. I'm not saying it's correct, it's not the best scenario, but the word need. I don't need anybody. Our society is so well developed, communications, transportation, and so on, you don't need a partner to climb the mountain. You don't need the partner to move to California. I mean, two people can survive in a sleeping bag at sub-zero temperature. But we don't need sleeping bags. We have tents and Coleman lanterns and sufficient sleeping bags that you can survive alone nowadays. Right? Going through a bunch of stuff to saying our parents needed each other. And the probability of their surviving, I'm talking death, physical death, as well as psychological deprivation. There is enough entertainment today that we can play a psychological head game saying, oh, I'm happy today. What did you do today? I watched television today. Did you take any time to think of your spouse who you left in Buffalo? No, I haven't had the time. Doesn't mean that it didn't exist, but on a conscious level, you can be entertained enough to cope for long periods of time, conceivably getting toward more comfort of separation and divorce and a forgetfulness of responsibility and, in other words, a lost relationship and so on. You can fill in your time by shunning all of that, right? What I'm stating and advocating more is, of course, the caution to have to go through a scenario like that, God forbid a separation and divorce, is never truly fun or pleasant. It's always losing. Somebody loses something. It's not a good thing. It's generally a bad thing. And the preciousness of the old relationships. A lot of times we say, let's go to Sedona, Arizona, or let's have a conference, or let's go on television, instead of saying, let's sit across the room from each other, set the alarm clock, and not speak a word to each other. We can focus on each other. We might even smile or wink, or you can eliminate that. But stay in the same room with each other for 1 hour a day. What an investment. It might not even be fun the first hour, the first time you do it, but what an investment. Like you say, it cost me $30,000 to get this last divorce. Imagine if you put $30,000 into, and I'm not advocating any one of these, but counseling, a third or fourth honeymoon, a purchase of many, many books, articles, go visit friends that you don't normally visit, talk to other people, seek religious counseling. In other words, $30,000 worth of investment into cure
on the relationship
is not, that's an extraordinary amount of money. And if you invested that much time equals money, in other words, if you say that if we spend 5 months trying to get together and solve our social problems, that's not a lot of time compared to a lifetime. And the cost of that is minimal compared to the cost of guaranteed a divorce. So, little things like that people, it's so simple that they forget about that. They get all wrapped up in their own thing, or the sword fighting, and yeah, well, if you do this to me, I'll tell you one thing, you won't get this house, I'll burn it down. And they're so focusing on that sort of thing, or, well, go ahead because I'll get the house and all the finances and you will have to support me. And what are you saying? Are you saying, well, go ahead, that'll make me happy? Or now, if you do that and you have to support me, then we'll both be happy? They're forgetting the very basic thing that situations like that create. Now, that focusing on the relationships and spiritually speaking, it is okay to love as unconditionally as you want to imagine to a newfound friend or a stranger, being a married person. I have been in that circumstances thousands of times. For me personally, I have been fortunate. I'm saying it like that because I don't want to lay full claim to it. And the same token I do want to state for somebody who doesn't know me that well is that I have been automatically or culturally conditioned to a very high degree of fervently faithful, sexually pure, if you will. And don't get hung up on any of these singular words, but because what I'm really saying is that it's been natural for me compared to a socially acceptable learned thing, or I read the psychology book, or I've read all the New York State laws. As opposed to that, this has come more natural for me. So I don't want to compare myself to anybody else because I know most other people have a much more difficult time dealing with should I become less, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Or what? Not being monogamous, you mean?
Oh, right. Because toward that, in other words, should I remain monogamous or not? Or in the moment of passion and or romance, might be a one-night thing, or I hit you in less than 15 minutes. And I know about that, and I've experienced about to that degree. But I guess I'm a good manipulator, because I've been able to turn that around toward a little more unconditional, or outright take my physical hands and stop and just say, I'm sorry. In other words, I'm able to say no.
Yeah.
Just say no. I've been able to do that on several occasions, I can brag and say. But seriously, been able to say no. Many people can't. And I understand that. So when scenarios like that develop, about what to focus on. Focus on the short-term effect, and then maybe more importantly, the long-term effect. And what is it that your job is? Like Elaine yelled out and said, if you're going to be so unconditional and promote love and love and love, don't deny your spouse and where you're supposed to be right here, right now. Get that squared away. No, go home and clean your house. I said that to a dear friend of mine, and he understood what I meant threefold. I meant his house was in disarray, his physical house, and it needed straightening up and cleaning. I even offered a backhoe to help. I meant go clean your house. Those you get off the sofa and start moving around and clean your house. But like the house of David in the Bible, I meant clean your house. That was clean your own family up before you neglect and shun and throw away and go off and try to promote this new and wonderful, cleansed, and more pure and lovey-dovey situation. And a third way, which I won't even bother to go into. How are we doing for time?
Yeah, 50.
Okay. Did you want to lead me into another thing, or should I?
Yeah, well, I think you covered it, except that I know you told me one time, fairly recently, that in having a deep and caring relationship with someone, you have 95% of the wonderful part of it without taking that last step and blowing your marriage, their marriage, whatever, out of the water. You don't really need that because you already have what's really most important, and you still all respect each other's commitment. And then you don't lose the friend either.
Yeah, that's not so easily done than said. Much easier said than done. Yeah, I don't know really how to respond to that right away.
It's to keep your friendship, or your caring about people.
Yeah.
Proper.
See, one of my problems is it's been so easy, and I've been able to do that. And I know as an example that Elaine has, I can say she has a hang up with regarding certain relationships that I have been involved in recently, and she says, no, nothing should exist. In other words, you should have no relationship at all with this person because of the close call.
Oh, right.
In other words, that's the insurance policy. And there's security for Elaine in that. And that's understandable. And that's often the safest way.
Right.
And she can't truly perceive that either I do have the capacity for dealing with that, and that this new, more unconditional love that I at least claim, I need to say it like that I at least claim, that there is enough power in that to supersede or override the probability of me giving into romantically or sexually or that which would be socially unacceptable to Elaine and my spousal relationship that would jeopardize that. And yet, so often, in fact, I even dare say a majority of everybody we're talking to has found themselves in a circumstance like that and have not only had a difficult time, but have said, yeah, but now that you've said all of that, it is just so much better, and that I would prefer all of the trade-offs and not wish to give up this new relationship. And even if it means to the point that if my spouse can't handle the new me, then that is not necessarily my fault, or that it will be better for all of us, and certainly better for me, to go with this more comfortable, easier, or newfound relationship. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's not, it's a true statement. Mm-hmm. And it is easier. And one of the things that we, so-called spiritually oriented people, have to think a lot about and decide is that should it ever be the easier way out? Mm-hmm. And that what is our real job? Mm-hmm. I mean, should we ever neglect or shun or throw away any of our baggage?
Mm-hmm. And wherever our priorities and what's important.
Well, of course, on an ongoing basis, in other words, here's a new development. Well, does this fit into my main priority? And then then each stage of the way. There's what are your immediate priorities? What is your long range goals? Will it hamper that? Will it fit into that? Now, see, that's all logical deductive reasoning, because we're bordering on and talking about romance. And as I said, don't ever make an assumption, spiritually speaking. Don't ever make an assumption or use logical deductive reasoning when you're talking about romance or sexual activity. By that I mean those sexual either arousal or activity, because where is your conscience, or where is your logical deductive reasoning when you're involved in those emotions or physical states of mind, and I mean not only physical states of mind, but a state of mind that creates physical sensations that you are out of control with your other faculties. And it's kind of sounds awfully intellectual, but I think you understand.
So I know in the first taping you said something about there's no such thing as unconditional love, not even a mother for a child. But in this case, like you almost can't say that unconditional love and romantic love can be.
They're not compared at all, right?
No.
They're not the same thing. You cannot unconditionally
Love
have
somebody
romantic, right? You can't have unconditional romantic love.
Uh-huh.
The word romantic love disqualifies unconditional love and focuses on one little aspect of an expression of love. Those you can have sexual love, which is one of the worst forms of love compared to unconditional love, because it is so conditional and it is so emotional, and with that usually physically stimulating, or in those effective at least, that other faculties are totally disoriented or completely out of focus. In other words, can you be intellectual in an orgasm or in a state of ecstasy, romantically speaking? In other words, you can be romantically in love with a sunset. And how well do you think you're going to do math? If you think so, go to the seashore with a paper and pencil. I mean, try this. Rather than a screw up a relationship, try it with one sunset. There'll be many other sunsets, and you will in your life review will have lost that one sunset, but try it. And then you really allow yourself to fall in love with romantic love, if you can, distort this in the scenario, fall in love with the sunset, and then like halfway through it, like the sun is halfway, behind the water, okay? And then force yourself, even have a little alarm clock and time it, so that the alarm clock goes off and then quickly go down and do some involved math. I promise you, you won't be that mechanical. And that's what I'm saying, regarding this, and it affects us in such a way that just don't expect. Now, one of our problems is that we have relationships, yours and mine and so on, where there is such dis-ease in aspects of our relationship that it is just so refreshing and comfortable to be alleviated of that state of dis-ease or that problem. And that if this other person shows no signs of that problem, that we can be attracted and overwhelmed by this other individual. And it can even be, in my case, it can be a group of people. I mean, do I experience form of ego in a large group of people? Well, you're damned right I do. I mean, I have to.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to. It's natural. And then is that enough to say, well, I know we had this weekend planned, Elaine, but I have a chance to talk to 10,000 people at one time. And I mean, thank God, if it be important enough, I will say, well, I'm sorry, this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for these 10,000 people for me to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
But, I have to focus my energies and so on to and with Elaine for that weekend.
I'm going to turn on this light so that we can wrap up with the final question.
Okay, and turn that switch over there, too. A little more light, because we're
both losing
speaking
our
of
light.
sunsets.
Yeah. Why don't we close with you sharing with people about the unconditional love in connection with the Berlin Wall in 4 minutes.
Oh,
Can you do it in 4
for 3 or 4 minutes. My goodness. Yeah, well, I said a while ago, and I don't remember the verbatim what I said, but I was giving an analogy, and I said, well, let me give you an example, because it was just prior to what developed with the recognition that the Berlin Wall was no longer apropos, and it started to come down, and it's continuing to do so, thank God. I said, well, let me give you an example. How many army tanks would it take to obliterate the entire Berlin Wall? Physically impossible. There are not that many army tanks, and it cannot physically be done. If you lined them all up side by side, and they all fired at the same time and emptied their caches of arms, there would still be this rubble, and the wall would still be there. Okay? And even if the tank stayed there for 5 months doing that day after day after day till their barrels melted down, the wall and the rubble and the symbolic gesture would still be there. An attitudinal change of a group of people or many people, or a realization attitudinally that this is no longer acceptable. And what took place? People brought roses. And instead of army tanks, they brought roses. They climbed on the wall and handed them to the guards that a month before would have machine gunned them to death. An attitudinal change says this is no longer religiously, socially, or politically acceptable. And what is this? Let's stop this. The wall is coming down. I mean, symbolically, this is the new age. This is what we're preaching about. This is what we're striving for. Attitudinal change is more powerful than an atomic bomb, and a nuclear holocaust, than arms and stuff like this. There's still currently a need for some of that stuff during the transition. But this is what we're striving for. Relationships, attitudinal changes. You and most of you viewing this have already had or are into attitudinal changes, spiritually speaking. Strive, take time, spend money, effort of showing and teaching your spouse and your close friends that they have the ability, first of all, of changing their attitude. Don't say you have a bad attitude or you have an attitude as the teenagers do, because that's confrontational. But show them that an attitudinal change is better. Let's be that example, if you will, kind of philosophically speaking. Be that example. And with attitudinal change will become the reality. And of course, as something is better and better and better, try to promulgate it that way. It's 11 years from my near-death experience, and I'm fervently, fanatically at times, striving for this with Elaine. I get her angry at me. She woke up 2 mornings ago, I believe it was. She says, I don't want to be philosophized to. And in spite of that request, I still did for about 15 minutes. I mean, did that aggravate her? Did that help her? What was the trade-off? Well, in hindsight, I'm not totally sorry that I did it anyway, that I spoke about one particular aspect or one thing, because it's almost uncontrollable to me that I can't give that up. I mean, with everything that I know and that I've learned, I have to keep trying. I'm not obsessive about it. Well, again, that's argumentative in itself. But I mean, I realize that I may fail. It's not an ultimate challenge for me. And yet I may be contradicting myself because I make it a priority. So it is a challenge, and I want this, I wish this. And even if I'm never satisfied by my measurements, by my judgmental statements as to how much I've been able to show, share, and teach my wife Elaine, and she, of course, ongoing is doing that to and for me. I mean, I'm receiving every bit as much from her as I can from her, especially the fact that day after day, I need more, and I have to do more. But again, the focus, the attitudinal change, and so on, and you can apply that with everything. What do you think? Thank you. Namaste.